Welcome to Sparks of History, where Jewish history and world history meet. We are very proud to present the first in a series featuring the highly accomplished and very popular authors of Mosaica Press. Today's guest is Rabbi Chaim Leib Belsky, author of Eretz Yisroel, Halacha and Minhag, a practical guide for those living, visiting, and traveling in Eretz Yisroel. The book, Sefer Eretz Yisroel, was released by Mosaica Press earlier this year to wide acclaim. Rabbi Belsky currently serves as the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivas Tiferes Yisrael in Yerushalayim, Jerusalem. Raised in Chicago, Rabbi Belsky learned for many years in the Mesivta Yeshiva Rabbeinu Chaim Berlin. Rabbi Belsky, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it very much.
How are you doing?
Baruch
It's a pleasure.
Good. Thank you so much. Just to begin, why this Sefer? What was the impetus in writing this book, Eretz Yisroel?
So yes, interesting question. It could be that the idea for the Sefer had an earlier origin, but what really inspired me to write it was I was on a Shabbaton with the Yeshiva once up north in a Moshav, and we woke up Shabbos morning, and we were wondering whether or not we're supposed to be duchening. Was there because kainim on this Moshav? And I know this was an issue that's been discussed the past few hundred years here in Israel, the duchening every day, or just on Shabbos, the north versus the area around Yerushalayim to the south. And it caught me footed. I wasn't sure whether or not we should be duchening. And I started thinking, I wouldn't even know where to look. Is there any sefer out there that really goes through in detail, we're yes, we're not, and for that matter, why there are different minhagim when it comes to duchening. And Motzei Shabbos, when I looked, I couldn't find any svarim on Hilchos Eretz Yisroel, from a broader perspective. There were svarim that dealt with specific issues. For example, Trumas and Maisras, Shemitah, and other specific issues in Hilchos Eretz Yisroel. I couldn't find anything in print that covered a broader range. And to take a step back from that, in dealing with the Yeshiva the past 15 years, and living in Eretz Yisroel for the past 20-something years, there are always people traveling to Eretz Yisroel. There are always people coming here, whether it's for the first time ever or the first time since they were in Yeshiva seminary 35 years ago. And there are always halachic issues that people are just unfamiliar with. A lot of our familiarity with halacha comes from the home, comes from our upbringing, what we call Girsa Diankasa. People are familiar that there's an issue taking a child off the fire and putting it back on because they saw that in their house growing up. But here you come to Eretz Yisroel, and there are so many halachas that people are unfamiliar with, simply never saw it. So that they wouldn't even notice it unless they were paying very close attention, or they wouldn't be aware because it's something going on behind the scene that the rabbi's dealing with, like Trumas and Maisras. Or they didn't notice the sign in the store. They didn't know that when you go to the kaisel, you're supposed to. I've had people tell me with a straight face that my minhag is not to tear kriya. I find that fascinating. Where does that minhag come from? A lot of people are just unfamiliar with the basic issues, and well-meaning people, erlicha people, they didn't grow up with it, so they're just not familiar. So I was inspired, because of the boys in yeshiva, just that they should have something to look to, and I was hoping that the broader public would benefit from it as well. Bring awareness of Hilchos Eretz Yisroel to the table. So it should at least be a conversation. The book wasn't meant to be exhaustive. It wasn't meant to bring up every single opinion, but it was meant, hopefully, that people should be aware of what the issues are and bring some clarity, and Be'ez Hashem be mechazik people's Hilchos Shmir of Hilchos Eretz Yisroel.
Okay, excellent. There's a statement that the Rav that you had quoted in the book from Bereshit Rabbah, which says that there is no Torah like the Torah of Eretz Yisroel, and there's no wisdom like the wisdom of Eretz Yisroel. What does that mean?
What I've seen in the Mefarshim, it seems to suggest that it's not talking about the specific halachas of Eretz Yisroel necessarily. It's talking about the relationship that we have with Torah through Eretz Yisroel. Eretz Yisroel, enhances our understanding of Torah. Avir da'aretz machkim. It opens up our neshama in ways that is not possible in Chutz La'aretz. The Torah was given to us to be kept, ideally, in Eretz Yisroel. I mean, there are even suggestions in the Rishonim that and I don't mean this from a practical point of view, but from a Agada point of view, that the idea of keeping mitzvahs in Chutz La'aretz is simply to keep us familiar with them, so that when we come back to Eretz Yisroel, and that when we're living in Eretz Yisroel, we haven't lost connection with them. Since the land was meant to be the operating home base of Yisrael in this world, the Limud Torah and the relationship that we have with Torah is vastly superior on a different level in Eretz Yisroel. The point even says that a person learning Torah in Eretz Yisroel, a person in Eretz Yisroel is worth two people from Chutz La'aretz. When a person moves to Eretz Yisrael from Chutz La'aretz, so with two people in Eretz Yisroel, Chazal say. You see that being in Eretz Yisrael elevates a person's neshama, elevates his perceptions in Torah. That's the general idea that I've seen the Mefarshim saying.
Okay. Without getting political, because certainly the whole ideas of the borders of the state of Israel is something that's always in contention. But what are the issues, the general issues surrounding how we define the borders of the land of Israel and of Jerusalem?
So it's very interesting. So the Eretz Yisrael as a country, there were different borders set down in the Torah. Avraham Avinu was promised the land of 10 nations. 10 nations, Klal Yisrael was not zoicha to when they came to Eretz Yisrael after they left Mitzrayim. They were zoicha the land of 7 nations. So the Torah puts down one set of borders. That set of borders was greatly expanded by David HaMelech. It was added on to, aside for the borders that were put down, the Torah, Bnei Ruvain, Gad, and half Shev Menashe, added on to that, Kiyadua. And then when they left there, so there even, I apologize, Shlomo Melech added on to those borders. There were, Eilat is definitely a contentious issue, because it's clearly in Eretz Edom, but there were times that Klal Yisrael had control over those areas. There were times they didn't. And the issue of the Kedusha that Shlomo Melech sanctified Eretz Yisrael with, and that Klal Yisrael sanctified Eretz Yisrael with, that became batal after the Churban. They came back after 70 years in Bavel. They were not Mekadesh, the same areas that they had beforehand. And there were areas that were under Jewish control at certain points in time that weren't under Jewish control at all points in time. So I hope I'm not being too confusing, but it is a confusing issue. The borders were constantly moving over the years. That's the general issue. Even I came across a shlita in the Rishonim even, and the Achronim that's touched upon the eastern border of Israel. It's very unclear where it actually extended to. We know the Jordan River, in a sense, was the eastern border, but there were three Shvatim on the other side of the Jordan. And what was the eastern border of the three Shvatim? Rashi seems to suggest, in Ezra, and others talk about it, that eastern border might have gone all the way to the Euphrates in Iraq. So whereas everyone is telling the Jewish people that, we're occupying too much land, it could be we don't have enough of our original country. It's very possible that Eretz Yisrael went all the way up until the Euphrates. People used to consider Euphrates the northern border of Eretz Yisrael. But it's very possible
Euphrates coming all the way up in Turkey, starting in Turkey.
Yeah, Right. So when Chazal say it takes 15 days to get back, like after Aliyah L'Regel, it would take the last person 15 days to get back to the Euphrates, before hopefully it started raining. When we learned that in Yeshiva Tana, we think that it means to the north. But in truth, it might mean all the way down until the Persian Gulf, and that would make Eretz Yisroel infinitely larger than anything we're familiar with today. And yeah, there were other nations mixed in, Ammon and Moav, Midian, Edom, but Klal Yisrael's dominion might have curved around them, it seems. So it's not 100% clear what the borders were. The western border, we know it went into the water, but how far into the water? Did it only go, until a line running from Turi Amna north to Nachal Mitzrayim in the south, or did it cover all of the islands in the Mediterranean until Gibraltar? There are people that suggest that. It's not clear. So that's Yisrael as a country. Yerushalayim specifically, it's also very unclear. There are certain markers that we have, but Yerushalayim was destroyed, unfortunately, a number of times. And HaRav specifically, it says that Turnus Rufus of Russia, he plowed it over, he flattened it. So where exactly the borders of Yerushalayim were, HaRav are very unclear. There are some that suggest that we see the eastern side of HaRav where the Shar Rachmim is today, the Golden Gates, and there's an Arab cemetery. A lot of people assume that it's Pashat, that's where the wall was. Some suggest it was many feet over, up to a few dozen feet to the east. There's a Gemara in Rashi and Sukkah that suggests the eastern border of Yerushalayim of HaRav was lower down, so the light from the Simchas Beis Shueva would light up the city. That would seem to indicate that we were living in Nachal Kidron and Har HaZeisim. It's not 100% clear what that means and whether or not that was part of the city. The northern border of the city, the western border, I haven't found anyone that tells conclusively where it might have gone past. It's a big shayla in Hilchas Purim. Where do we consider Yerushalayim extending until? And historical documentation is not always accurate. A lot of it is based on conjecture. The benefit of Chazal is that when Chazal say something, we don't have to ascertain the historical accuracy. Chazal established something from a halachic standpoint, so we have clarity. And when trying to clarify things from historical works that aren't necessarily written with an eye towards halacha, it can leave us with a lot of questions.
There are numerous landmarks, and the Rav had alluded to it, to the sea, to the Yam HaGadol, the Mediterranean Sea. Numerous landmarks in Eretz Yisroel, the land of Israel. What are some of the special blessings, brachos, when one travels in Eretz Yisroel, whether it's the Mediterranean, the Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee, the Hermon Mountains, the Dead Sea? Any special brachot that we should be aware of? And are there any other landmarks that are significant?
So the two most famous brachos are Oisem Asabrachus, which a person would recite on any landmark that would inspire, invoke, feelings of awe for the Rabbeinu Shalom's creation. That it is something that could be subjective, because there's some people that are just not as inspired, they're not as romantic when they see a mountain, or it could be if they see Mount Everest, it would be inspiring. But if they see, Har Hermon or Har Carmel, which have great biblical significance, which played very significant roles in Jewish history throughout Tanakh, it wouldn't necessarily inspire them as much, either because they're not familiar with the history of the place, or just because they don't find it as evocative. So that could be a subjective bracha, Oisem Asabrachus, when it comes to these things. The Mediterranean, interestingly, there's a question amongst the poskim: is that considered the Yam HaGadol? There's a special bracha that one makes when he sees the Yam Gadol, and the Poskim debated whether or not the Mediterranean is the Yam Gadol, or you'd have to actually see the Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific. But a lot of Poskim suggest that you put the two brachas together. Oyser Maser Bereishis, you don't have to say Hashem twice. The Dead Sea, interestingly, is seemingly from Chazal is not a sea original to Maser Bereishis, and that's why even though it's not very big, but it's definitely significantly larger than the Kinneret. But the Kinneret was definitely created with Maser Bereishis. Pasuk says, "Kiu al Yamim Yesada." There are seven bodies of water surrounding Eretz Yisroel. The Kinneret is definitely one of them. The Yam Melech, though, the Medrash seems to indicate, was only formed after the destruction of Sodom, so it's not an original body of water. A very interesting bracha that Chazal mentioned, which is not very simple to track down, it says if one sees Lot's wife, it makes a bracha. The question is how to identify Lot's wife. She's supposed to be a pillar of salt somewhere near the Yam Melech, but people have tried to identify it. There is an area fenced in, with a pillar of salt, where they call Lot's wife. I remember they asked Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky about it, and he said, well, Chazal say that the cows come every night and lick it down to a stump and it regenerates, so if you don't see that happening, that must not be it. So we're still on the hunt to track down Lot's wife to make that bracha. There's even a bracha that you make on seeing Lot's kever, another interesting makom that is hard to identify. There are a few others, but interesting places. Bez Hashem Yisbarach, Mashiach will come speedily in our times. We'll be able to make all these brachas.
What are places
we can identify the locations accurately?
What are there places that are identifiable that a blessing of bracha could be made? Whether it's a city that that was Avodah Zarah that was destroyed, that was a certain type of city. Are there any places where people specifically go to and can make these kinds of brachas?
There's interesting. There's we're close across the Yarden. We're close across the Yarden. There's a bracha. The Mishnah says, it should be relatively easy to identify. They crossed, opposite Yerichai. So it doesn't give you a lot of room to be questioning. But there is a tshuva, I think from Rabbi Tzion Abba Shol, where he talks about where they crossed the Yam Suf, which wouldn't be in Eretz Yisroel, it's farther south, but I think he also discusses where they crossed the Yarden. He says if you're Mesupik, exactly where they crossed, then it wouldn't be pasha to make a bracha, but if you'd be in a helicopter and you'd be able to see the entire area where you're unquestionably seeing where they crossed, even if you can't identify it specifically, then you'd be able to make the bracha. There are other cities. I mean, you have areas in Eretz Yisroel where historians say, up north, we had the Mizbeach of Yeravam ben Nevat and Dan. I'm not very familiar with the archaeological evidence and the proofs that they would bring to say that this is definitely, the Mizbeach that Yeravam built or not. There are brachas that you make where Avodah Zarah was uprooted in Eretz Yisrael. I'm not very familiar with the archaeological history, though, of some of these. So one could definitely make a bracha without a Shem HaMalchus. The question is, it'd have to be looked into specifically, some of these places, because there's definitely a lot of conjecture going on when it comes to identifying places. It's not always accurate.
Okay. One of the famous customs, or perhaps more well-known customs as it relates to Yerushalayim, Jerusalem, is the lighting of the candles before the Sabbath, before Shabbos. Where did that custom originate from, and how did it spread to cities outside of Yerushalayim, Jerusalem?
This is actually a fascinating question. Rabbi Vadia Yosef, I think the tshuva is in Yabia Omer, says that it doesn't have a halachic basis, a root in halachic sources. But if I'm not mistaken, the most common explanation that I've come across is based on a shitas rishonim in Beitza, shita mukubetzes in Beitza, that rishonim said that Tosefes Shabbos is supposed to be half an hour, but that half an hour is not a 60-minute hour; it's an hour of shoyz manis. And since the hours can fluctuate between the winter and the summer, the longest hour of shoyz manis throughout the year would be about 40 minutes. So before they established the custom, it's been suggested to leave it at 40 minutes the entire year so that it never should be an issue. That's one of the probably the more common explanation that I've seen. Rabbi Gellis brings it in his famous Minhag Eretz Yisroel, Shem a few Rishonim. There are other explanations given based on calculations, mathematical calculations for Shkia and Alois, but again, they're mostly conjecture. An established source for the minhag has been lost in history, but there are other places. Petach Tikva, if I'm not mistaken, was started. The Yeshiva was started by people from Yerushalayim, so they brought their minhagim with them. There are other places, outside of Yerushalayim that they adopted it as well. Other places took shorter periods of time based on other interpretations of what a half an hour is and when Shkia is in those locations and those elevations. But if I'm not mistaken, that's the more commonly given explanation for why it's 40 minutes.
When one visits,
I hope I'm not using the word "if I'm not mistaken" too much.
No, it's fine. It's fine. That's
because a lot of this stuff, I feel bad, but a lot of this stuff isn't 100% clear. So I don't want to come across stating something authoritatively if it's not clear.
No, it's fine. Not at all. When one goes to a Beis Knesset, one goes to a synagogue outside of the land of Israel, outside of Eretz Yisroel, on a Friday night, the custom is to make kiddush in the shul for those people who might not hear kiddush, whatever the reason. Well, we'll get to why the reason is. Yet that custom, that minhag, is never done here in Eretz Yisroel and Israel. What's the difference and what's the source for that?
So the minute to make kiddush and shul throughout the years was because there were people traveling that used to be staying over, even sleeping in the shul, eating in the shul, and therefore kiddush was made in order to be mitzvah them in kiddush, and it wasn't an issue of kiddush makom suda because there were people eating there and there were people staying there. Over the years, even though it's not very common more recently to have people eating in shul, there are still some communities that held on to the earlier minhagim. I think it's the Beis Yosef that says that if there's no one in shul, so we don't make kiddush in shul, and if so, as the Moradar of the Yisrael, since most people in Israel always followed with the psak of the Beis Yosef, so that minhag was probably not adopted here. If anything, it's more of a question: why are people still doing it in Chutz La'aretz these days? But the minhag in Israel to not make kiddush and shul would actually be more in line with the simple understanding of the halacha. So the question, yeah.
Okay. Well, why is there a difference?
I reworded that last question. We get that.
Okay. Well, why is there a difference regarding the halacha, to the laws of a mezuzah, between Eretz Yisroel, Israel, and outside of Israel. What are the differences? And is there a broad hashkafic philosophical reason behind that?
So there's actually famously the biggest difference is between someone taking a residence, an apartment in Eretz Yisrael. There's a Rashi that says that in Eretz Yisrael, the Gemara says that in Eretz Yisrael you'd be required to put up a mezuzah on a rental on a temporary right away, whereas in Chutz La'aretz you'd have 30 days. And the Gemara says because of Yeshiva Eretz Yisrael. Rashi explains because a person when he leaves Dira is not supposed to take his mezuzahs down. It's considered dangerous to take his mezuzahs down. If he's not going to take his mezuzah down, then he's not going to be so quick to want to leave. It seems that it wasn't so easy to get mezuzahs, or maybe people didn't have as much money in those days, so getting mezuzahs wasn't so posh. The person, he says, want to leave so fast if he can't take the mezuzahs down. And even if he has to leave, he'll make sure to find another Jew to take it over right away, so it shouldn't be an issue. So the idea of Yeshiva Eretz Yisrael seems to play a very significant role when it comes to Hilchos Mezuzah. We want to keep Eretz Yisrael populated with fine, God-fearing Jews.
Okay. The whole idea of, again, boundaries and different cities and the status of different cities certainly it plays a prominent role in the Purim holiday, in the difference between walled cities and unwalled cities. Just a general overview of how this plays out today. And again, I'm sure it's not 100% clear, but that's okay. What the visitors or people who live here have to worry about when they go to different cities? What are those cities in addition to Jerusalem? Which parts of Jerusalem, as you touched upon before, in the borders of Jerusalem? Purim. Let's just.
Right. So interestingly, you touched upon in the question the lack of clarity. It's actually fascinating. It's hard to know today, what the locations of the biblical cities. Chazal tell us any city that was walled for the times of Yeshua ben Nun keeps Purim on the second day, on the 15th, like in Shushan. It's very hard to identify those cities from that biblical era, and B, to know whether or not they actually had a wall. The Vilna Gaon interestingly writes in his Pirush on Sefer Yeshua that any city mentioned in Sefer Yeshua had a wall at that time. I don't know if others agree or disagree, but he's certainly on record as saying that. So that would give you the impression that any city that we can know for a fact was around back then and that currently has a Jewish community within a short distance that's visible, Samach V'Nira, would keep Purim on the second. Practically, the only city that has an established custom through all the generations to keep Purim only on the second day is Yerushalayim. And if I'm not mistaken, most of Yerushalayim, if not all Yerushalayim, by most people is kept on the 15th. There are a number of Yereim Ushleimim, Erlich Yidden, that also read Megillah on the 14th, because there have been questions over the years how far the city actually reached. So there are minhagim to read Megillah on the 14th as well in some of the outlying areas of Yerushalayim. Other cities outside Yerushalayim, so certain cities that we can definitely identify. Tveria, we know what Tveria is. It definitely hasn't moved. No one suggested otherwise. But Tveria was a question in the Gemara's times. They wanted to know whether or not it's considered a walled city because the eastern border of Tveria was the water. So they have an established minhag to observe Purim 2 days because of a suffix. There are a lot of other cities. The city of Tzfas is a very popular city for the past 400 or 500 years, but it's really unclear what the city of Tzfas was in biblical times. Some have suggested that it was Kedesh Naphtali, but most opinions assert that it was not Kedesh Naphtali. Some say it was a city called Tzuf. It definitely is not the Tzfas mentioned in Tanakh. The Tzfas in Tanakh was a city in Shevi Yehuda. So it's really not clear if there was a city there, and if there was, it a large city? Was it a walled city? Then again, Tzfas is not out of the line of sight of Tveria or other cities near Tzfas that were walled cities in the times Yeshua ben Nun that would be considered Samach Venera. There are other cities around that also have a suffix, but no one has an established minhag to keep only the 15th. Only 15th. Beit Shemesh keeps on getting closer and closer to, ancient ruins that might have been ancient Beit Shemesh or another city, saying that could have been nearby. So as the construction continues, the likelihood of Beit Shemesh having a second day of Purim Misafik is going up exponentially every year. It could be even I don't live there, but it could be by now they're already people keeping a second day of Purim. But hopefully Mashiach will come very soon and solve all of these fakas for us.
And how about it if someone finds himself in Jericho, in Yericho, on Purim?
Yes, excellent question. I don't know if the word is emblematic or symptomatic of a lot of cities in this country that have been named for ancient biblical cities that were somewhere in the general area, but we don't know for a fact if they're on the original location. So their minhag throughout the years was to keep the 14th and not the 15th. And these days, unfortunately, a lot of these cities don't have Jews in them, so they haven't been able to keep up. Some, even if 150, 200 years ago, there might have been some sort of minhag to keep 2 days misafik, but once the community discontinued, that minhag fell by the wayside. So if a person goes to one of these places today, the poskim are not so keen on telling him to keep 2 days misafik when there is no established minhag to keep 2 days misafik.
Okay, good. As we're coming up,
I hope you can clean that up. Yeah.
As we're approaching Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, the attitudes towards the Churban, specifically in Jerusalem and Yerushalayim, and maybe more specifically, how one should approach the Kotel Hamaravi, the Western Wall, in Yerushalayim.
It's actually interesting. The Kotel has excited deep emotions, profound emotions by Klal Yisrael throughout the generations. But the question is, what emotions should it excite? I remember a Rebbe of mine, Rabbi Yosef Fruchtenheller Shlita, may live and be well. He once he told me when he first came to Eretz Yisroel, this is over 50 years ago, before there was jet travel. Direct from New York to Tel Aviv. You had to take multiple planes to get to Eretz Yisroel, and they weren't growing up with pictures and videos of the Kotel. The Kotel was a mythological place. It was something, legends about it, you dreamed about it. He said he remembers getting up in the morning, for Vasikin, walking to the Kotel, and the closer he got to the Kotel, the more his body started trembling until he finally saw the Kotel. He says his knees were knocking together and he burst out crying. And, halavai, that should be everyone's reaction. When a person comes and he sees the one remnant of the Churban, the Rabbeinu Shalom is, ever since the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, Klal Yisrael is a state of Avelus. They're holy people, Yereim Ushleimim, that get up every night and say, Tikkun Chatzos. We daven 3 times a day at least, for the return of the Shechina to Eretz Yisroel, Yerushalayim, and the Beis HaMikdash to be rebuilt. The Kotel is supposed to remind us of that and be moira to daven and to shed tears over the Churban. And it's not supposed to be a meeting place. It's not supposed to be a place to take pictures. I mean, at the opposite end of the spectrum, the chief rabbi shlita, Rabbi Yitzchok Yosef, in Yalkut Yosef, he writes that to go to just take pictures by the Koisel is an issue of Kalus Rosh. There's an Isser Chazal say of Kalus Rosh Keneged Shara Mizrach, to be acting in a lightheaded manner opposite the eastern entrance to Arbayis, but the Poskim all say that applies to all four sides. It's not just the eastern side. The eastern side was the entrance, so that was the most obvious. But even by the Koisel, it might not apply if you're much farther back. You're not by the actual Makam Atfila, but a person's attitudes and feelings, emotions when standing near the Koisel, seeing the Koisel, are supposed to bring about very powerful feelings of mourning. And yes, even though a person is supposed to daven with optimism, and we definitely look forward to be as good as Meher V'Yameinu, but celebrating the Koisel it's an interesting thought. It's an interesting thought, and people should definitely be conscious that there were Gdolim that wouldn't even step all the way to the Koisel. I mean, not even getting involved in the issues of putting fingers in between the cracks because of the kedusha of Harabayis. Just they wouldn't even put their hand to touch the Koisel, and they would walk towards the Koisel with great trepidation. They wouldn't turn their back on the Koisel. They'd walk out while facing the Koisel. These are all meant to show the reverence that we have for the one place where there's still Ashrois Ashchina Adagam Mazeh. So a person should definitely approach it with great Kovid Rosh. And Bez Hashem, I mean, the tefillas that we say there with such a frame of mind should go straight up to the Kisei HaKavod.
Amen. We urge all of our listeners and viewers to go online and check out Rav Belsky's wonderful book, Sefer Eretz Yisroel, the Minhag and Halacha of Eretz Yisroel, of the land of Israel, a Mosaica Press release, and urge all our viewers and listeners to go on as well onto Mosaica Press's website and look at all the wonderful books and Sfarim that Mosaica Press has been putting out. And Rav Belsky, thank you so much. You should continue to go from chayil to chayil, from strength to strength in all of your endeavors. Thank you so much.
Amen. Thank you very much. And you as well.
Thank you.